Welcome to Exploring Santa Cruz, a bi-weekly program on KSQD 90.7 FM. I'm your host for today, Matilda Rand. My guests are Jillian Greenside and John Hall, and we will be discussing saving heritage trees in downtown Santa Cruz. John Hall is the co-chair of Our Downtown, Our Future, which led to the November 2022 campaign in favor of Measure O, the measure that would have kept the farmers market on Lot 4 and preserved the heritage trees there. John is also a research professor of sociology at UCSC. Jillian Greenside is a longtime local activist. She has battled to save heritage trees for the past 40 years. She is the leader of the group Save Our Big Trees that successfully sued the city when it tried to weaken its heritage tree ordinance in 2015. Welcome, John and Jillian.
Very good to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Matilda.
John, can you start with giving us some background to the topic of discussion?
Thank you, Matilda. It's a long and twisted tale, I'm afraid. The city has wanted to have a parking garage on Lot 4, which is where the farmers market is held, at least for 2 decades. And then in 2016, after Measure S passed, the bond measure for funding libraries, they decided, it'd be great to have the library with the parking garage as a sweetener. And then when that went over like a lead balloon, they decided, let's add in affordable housing. Then a coalition of groups, and later Our Downtown, Our Future, created a measure that was on the ballot last November that would have kept the farmers market where it is and had affordable housing built elsewhere. That measure failed. We could go into that, but probably this is not the time or place. That means that if the project goes forward as envisioned, some 9 to 12 heritage trees that are on Lot 4, including some beautiful magnolias and 2 liquid ambers, will be cut down, removed, and this 8-story building will go up in its place sidewalk to sidewalk. So we are trying to save some of those trees at present.
Do I understand that before the elections were held, permit to cut down the trees was already applied for? Is that correct?
That gets into the ordinance and resolution that Jillian is more familiar with than I. But for several years, people have been alerting the city, which, after all, it's the city's ordinance, to the fact that the heritage tree ordinance and resolution have certain requirements that must be met, and if they're not met, then heritage trees cannot be removed. Last summer, Michael Guth of the Sierra Club wrote a letter to Bonnie Lipscomb, the Director of Economic Development at the city, pointing that out to her, and she responded, these plans so far are just conceptual. We'll make sure the architects know about these plans and know about the heritage tree requirements. And then the arborist, who had previously issued a report saying, yes, a number of these trees actually could be saved. They're worthy of preservation. The arborist then issued a report saying, sorry, the construction site entirely covers the entire block, and so none of the trees can be kept. And they applied for the heritage tree removal permit, which the Parks and Recreation Department granted. And to be clear, they granted the permit conditionally. The city and the developer will have to have a building permit and financing and final approval of the project by the city council before cutting any trees down. But the fight now is about whether any trees can be saved before we reach that point, which would come sometime in the first half of 2024.
Now, you mentioned the Sierra Club. Is there a bigger group of many different organizations that want to appeal the heritage tree removal permit?
There is a wonderful coalition, and I can say it's wonderful because it's led by somebody else. Pauline Seals has done a wonderful job of pulling together groups, including Santa Cruz for Bernie, Our Downtown, Our Future, the Santa Cruz Climate Action Network. Other groups and individuals have signed petitions and so forth. One other detail, not almost up to the present, is that we appealed the heritage tree removal permit to the Parks and Recreation Commission in early December, and by a very close vote, 4-3, they rejected our appeal of the building permit, And since then, we have appealed it to the city council. But yes, it's quite a broad coalition that includes any number of different local groups.
I think the question was, did they apply for it before anything would happen? Yes, the developer did apply for a tree removal permit very early in the game, but as John has explained, nothing will be cut until everything is ready to go. But that still isn't very helpful for the trees that have been there for decades. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much people are aware, but our city was an early leader in having a heritage tree ordinance in the early 70s. Activists, neighbourhood activists such as particularly Carol De Palma led the way, and eventually the City Council, which was very environmentally conscious through many decades, adopted an ordinance that spelled out what a heritage tree is and their value and so on. The ordinance is pretty silent on when you can cut down a heritage tree. That's contained in an accompanying resolution. And there are basically 3 criteria under which you can cut down a heritage tree. And, they're pretty reasonable because nobody wants a dangerous tree threatening a person or a house. So if a tree is dangerous or diseased or dead, you can get a permit to cut it down. That's one basis. Another basis is if it's affecting, undermining the foundation of a property, or this is a little bit problematic, or is likely to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of our big trees have been taken down because that is very subjective. Is it likely to? Well, unfortunately, permits have been granted when, in my judgment and arborist judgment, that tree could probably be saved. It's the third one that applies here in this instance. And the third criterion under which you can get a permit to cut down a heritage tree is if a project design cannot be altered to accommodate the tree. That's what we're dealing with here, that one simple sentence. If a project design cannot be altered to accommodate a tree or trees. So one would think, since in this case it's the city who is the developer, it's not a developer coming in with the plans already made up and puts it down on the planner's desk and the planner says, well, we have a heritage tree ordinance and you're going to have to take it back and change this because it says if it can be altered to save the heritage tree, that's what the rules say. Well, in this case, it was the city. The city knows its resolution. The city knows all of those criteria and was reminded, not only from the Sierra Club, but other organisations wrote in very early in the game, reminding the Economic Development Director of this criterion. And she said, yes, and trees are wonderful and we'll do, blah, blah, blah. Well, that wasn't done. And despite the reminders, despite the fact that the city is starting the design, despite the fact, as John laid out, that the design was changed to accommodate different big things, the trees were essentially ignored. So we come to the final stage when nothing has been done to try and save these trees, which is reprehensible because these, although we lose a lot of our heritage trees, these trees were beloved by so many people. And I don't want to privilege one tree over another. However, there are a lot of people who have strong feelings about preserving them. So where we are now is we feel that we have very sound grounds in the city's own laws that these trees can be saved, should be saved, and all that it requires is a few lines on paper. The design is not yet in concrete, altered to accommodate just a few. So that's where we are, and we're hoping that the City Council and the Planning Commission will honour that requirement.
When I talked to you, you said that the saving of the trees not only enhances the project, but is required under the city law. And I think that required, needs to have a little bit more emphasis. How do you get the city to see that it's their own law that they have to follow?
Well, and it's a question of integrity, isn't it? And whether they have it or they don't, because they're quite aware of the resolution. They're quite aware of the requirements. They're very aware that they did nothing. The public record shows that there was no conversation or written conversation that said, well, architect, could you do this? We've got to see if we can save some trees. That never happened. So how we require them, well, I think they have to look to their own integrity, and the community has to hold them accountable.
Right. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, for those people that are listening that do not know what a heritage tree is, can you briefly state what it is?
Yes, very briefly. It's usually based on size and its diameter, and it's 24 inches at breast height above grade. That's 54 inches circumference. That's one criterion. Another one would be a very distinctive species. Maybe there's only one or two in the city. That might qualify. If it was planted as a commemorative, honouring somebody, that would apply. So there's not a lot of criteria, but those are the main ones.
Okay, thanks. I want to remind people that you're listening to Exploring Santa Cruz on KSQD. My name is Matilda Rand, your host, and my guests are John Hall and Jillian Greenside, discussing the removal of heritage trees downtown Santa Cruz. So let's talk about why saving some of these trees is important.
I think the first thing to say is that these trees are beloved, and they are beloved by huge numbers of people. These trees are magnificent, the magnolias especially and the liquid ambers. They are on Lot 4 where the farmers market is held every Wednesday, and people find these trees to be places that engage them. You see people sitting around on the trunks of them, leaning against the trunks of them, enjoying the shade and so forth. These are not just trees out in the forest somewhere, which deserve saving too, but these trees impact enormous numbers of people's lives every week. And it is, in my view, tragic that most of them will be lost, and it really behooves the city to follow its own laws in making a good faith effort to preserve some of them, and we have a plan which we can discuss about how some of them can be preserved. There are certainly environmental reasons. I won't go into those, but I do want to say a word about the architectural and city planning issues. This city deserves better than to have urban space created by having buildings built sidewalk to sidewalk. Mm-hmm. It deserves better than to have streetscapes that are continuously empty with no vitality to them. And we've lost a good deal of that with the Lot 4 project. It is, I think, to call it a civic piece of architecture would be stretching it. But we need to do more to make it at least a place that will engage people. And having some trees, I think, is important for those architectural and urban planning reasons, as well as others that I think people appreciate as well, environmental issues.
I just add that sometimes people say, well, they'll be required to replant some saplings. Yes, but it doesn't take much stretch of the imagination to appreciate the difference between an 80 or 100-year-old tree and a sapling. I mean, it will take 80 to 100 more years for that sapling to grow to the stature, the carbon sequestration, the habitat, the sense of place that mature trees give. And we're losing our big trees, our heritage trees, at a rapid rate in Santa Cruz because of all of the infilling that is happening. If you follow the planning department's website and see all of the new structures, the projects, invariably see heritage tree removal permit, heritage tree removal permit. So they're gone. And downtown is the place where we, among other places, where we need to retain what we have as far as possible. I don't think anybody is going to say, well, look, if a tree's right in the middle of the project, and a number of these magnolias are, I mean, we're not going to be so outrageous to say, save them all. But that's what the city tried to say we were claiming, which was untrue. The trees that John just suggested are on the sidewalk. They're next to the sidewalk. And with a little imagination, a good architect, and if an architect had been told it was a requirement, could have designed a reasonably good project, still good, and retain those trees. And the difference between a mature tree gracing a very tall building, it's going to be taller than the big tall one they're building, is a dramatic difference in feel and scale. And I just finished by saying, I noticed in, I think it was Saturday's paper, there's a new project, a big one, I think it's 350 unit building on Ocean Street. Well, the planning staff said to the developer, look, you're going to have to change it because we want a paseo, a passageway, I guess that is a fancy word for, between Ocean and May Street. So the architect went back and incorporated that. Well, that's exactly what should have happened with this project. And it's more reprehensible because it's the city who is the developer, as I said before. And they should have said to their architect, we need to save some trees if possible, and so bring us something that incorporates them. That was not said, and that's why we feel that it's not asking too much to follow that thread and save some trees.
Right.
Yeah, it's both really a legal issue and a community issue and an environmental issue. Cedar Street in the downtown plan is designated as a village corridor. They are building an 85-foot story building on Lot 4 that will loom over that village and actually intrudes on the space of that village. So the city is already violating its downtown plan to build the thing at all. To add insult to injury by failing to obey its own laws concerning trees is really of, I think, substantial concern. And this is a bellwether, in a way, for urban planning and the environment and community in the whole of Santa Cruz, and certainly in downtown Santa Cruz, where there are, as many of us know, big plans for high-rise buildings south of Laurel. Jillian mentioned the development on Ocean Street. We are in real danger of becoming San Jose by the sea. We have to understand that if we're going to become the community that we envision being and continuing to grow into, we have to do it in a way that serves people's needs and serves the environment's needs and keeps trees as part of our streetscape.
What are the best possibilities for saving some of those trees?
The consulting arborist for the city examined each tree. It was a thorough examination, and as John mentioned previously, earmarked 5 trees that were worth preserving. That was before he was told, well, our project design is covering every square inch of the lot. So then he came back with an addendum saying all the trees have to go. Well, you can sort of see through that. So we would focus on those trees that are closest to the sidewalk, and that includes 1 magnolia and 2 liquid ambers. And unfortunately, the very large magnolia, which was quite healthy a while back, I recently saw a photograph of it, it looked very healthy, now is in serious decline. I won't speculate why. However, it is, and I doubt it could be preserved even on the basis of health. So 3 trees maybe we're asking. And the lot area for Lot 4 is 58,000 square feet. And then, of course, they're going up on that footage. It would probably take about 2,000 square feet to really generously preserve these trees so they have room to grow, because their roots, liquid amber's roots do spread. So 2,000, even go way out on a limb and say 3,000 square feet of space when they have 58,000 does not seem to be asking too much, and 10,000 of that square feet is for commercial space, and the council only asked for 7,000 to 9,000 of commercial space. So they could scale it back to 7, still be within what the council has ask for and allow for the trees. So I think in that, I hate using the expression, but that might be a win-win situation.
Well, and it does beg the question, why would the city prioritize having commercial space in a building that's being developed on city-owned land over heritage trees that predate the existence of the proposal? It would seem to me that if we're looking for commercial space in downtown Santa Cruz, I can find some for you. Give me a call. But if you're looking for a heritage tree, it's not that easy.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening with the appeal to the city council?
The city council has folded our appeal of the heritage tree permit that was voted down in the Parks and Recreation Commission by the 4-3 vote, folded it into a wider consideration of permits for the project, and they will take that up on March 14th or later. And so we will be presenting our appeal to the city council. And I think the city council, they're people of integrity who like to follow their own ordinances. And so we are hopeful that with people in the community letting them know about it, that people are rightly concerned that they will do the right thing. People can get involved by going to the Santa Cruz Climate Action Network website, which is scruzclimate, that's all one word, no periods, .org/tree-cutting.
Say it again.
scruzclimate.org/tree-cutting/ and there you can see the resolution, you can see the ordinance, you can see how to get involved.
I should probably say, for full transparency, I was on the Parks and Recreation Commission. I was one of the 3 who voted to support the appeal, and I was not reappointed to the Parks and Recreation Commission by the City Council in its recent appointments. So I'm no longer a commissioner, but I'm obviously very supportive to continue seeing this through and hopefully helping to save some of the trees.
Yeah, I was going to say, and still supporting what you believe needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Any actions that you're preparing?
We are thinking of the possibility of having a demonstration in favor of the trees. People are having their own photographs taken next to trees and emailing them to the City Council. You can find out about that on the Santa Cruz Climate Action Network website as well. So there will be things happening. You're welcome to get in touch with us through the website.
Yeah, that was my next question. How can people get in touch with you? So it's scruzclimate.org.
That's correct. And I'm happy to throw my email address in there if people want to learn more or do more. jrhall103@mac.com. So that's jrhall103@mac.com.
We have a few moments for some final thoughts. Jillian, you want to start?
I've been, as you mentioned in the beginning, I've been trying to save heritage trees in Santa Cruz almost since I arrived, and saw with horror how easily they were being cut down. And I would say in my sort of square area of where I live, on the Lower West Side, I've seen about 25 heritage trees cut down. So now there's one left, one. And the rest, some of them were cut down illegally, some of them were cut down with permits. And I bore witness to all of them. I took photographs before and after. It would make you weep. And I don't feel that our town is living up to its reputation. And I think it was very, very unfortunate that no city council member throughout this whole process stood up for the trees, stood up for the city ordinance and law, and said, now, wait a minute, we have, what about the trees? Nobody did that. It seems that trees are low on the list of priorities, and big trees are our lungs, and we cannot have such a cavalier attitude. We have to change that. The City Council has that opportunity on March 14th.
John?
Everything that Jillian said, I can't add to that except to say this is so important for our community as a community. It's got to be how we roll, is considering the trees.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matilda.
You've been listening to Exploring Santa Cruz, a discussion with Jillian Greenside and John Hall about saving heritage trees in downtown Santa Cruz.